longer by humans than the banana. It's estimated over 10,000 years. And the banana, interesting enough, ranks fourth after rice, wheat, and corn among the world's most economically important food crops. Okay. It's a critical dietary staple for hundreds of millions of people. Now, most of these people, of course, are consuming not the banana we first think of, the sweet-eating dessert banana, but the starchy cooking banana. But it is a vital source of nutrition for, as we say, hundreds of millions of people. Now, the international trade in bananas, they accredit that as beginning in 1870s when Lorenzo Baker, he was a fishing captain, brought the first large banana shipments to the United States, and that cultivar was called Gross Michael. Obviously, this was the age before marketing advisors. The name Gross Michael sounds like a turnoff. So it quickly picked up the name Big Mike. Question in the back?
If you move the arm down, we can't see your face.
Oh. I'm not sure I can.
Get some help there. That's
Thank you.
Much better.
Okay, good enough. Oh, that'd be great. Great. All right, thank you. So this Gross Michael variety, and actually it's spelled G-R-O-S, not G-R-O-S-S, but it has definite turn-off, the name, doesn't fit marketing criteria nowadays. Got the nickname Big Mike, much more marketable. Okay. Now, until the 1960s, the United States and the European sweet banana market, and that's basically what we think of. When we think of bananas, we think of sweet-eating dessert bananas. Basically, it was completely supplied by Gross Michael, Big Mike. However, in the early 1900s, a first appearance of what was called Panama disease, race 1, occurred in Suriname. This is a nasty fungus which basically kills banana plants. And as the decades rolled by the 1960s, the major banana importers were nearly bankrupt, in large part due to this devastating fungal disease, Panama disease, race 1. Now, the powers that be got together and said, things are not looking good. However, it was discovered that the Cavendish variety tended to be resistant to Panama disease, race 1. Now, one group said, okay, we'll just plant Cavendish. And the other group of experts said, but it's not that great a flavor banana. And the other powers that be said, well, what choice do we have? People in Europe and the United States still expect to go to the market and find what fruit is there 365 days a year? A banana. So the Cavendish came to be, and it came to prominence. And while it is a good banana for banana split, and it's a good banana for banana cream pie, if you're eating a banana for banana's sake, it is, to put it diplomatically, it is bland. It is wanting in flavor. Okay. Now, a new Panama disease, race 4, has rolled around. First discovered in 1992 in Asia. And we have black sigatuga, another fungal disease, originally found in Indonesia's Sigatuga Valley. And guess what? Cavendish variety is not immune or even resistant to these new problems. So, what does that boil down to? Well, let us take this as a motivation for us to grow our own bananas. Because while we have come to expect, take for granted 365 days a year bananas in the market, there may come a time when there may not be there 365 days a year. Do you have a question in the back?
If you go to Ralph's, what variety do you get?
If you go to your major chain markets, the large display of bananas are all Cavendish. Now, some of the bananas in the corner section with the exotics that are priced twice as much a pound as the Cavendish are starting to pop up, even in Ralph's.
Burros.
The burro, interesting enough, is, and I'm not sure why this is so, is just the market name for the fruit of the Orinoco. And the Orinoco, we can readily grow here. As a matter of fact, the Orinoco was probably the most popular backyard banana in San Diego County. And I don't know why when you go to the market, and if you see an extra banana beyond the Cavendish, it tends to be maybe the burro, or one of the red varieties, or a ladyfinger, quite short. And yet, when you go to buy the plant, it's always called Orinoco or Better Select. Which brings me to another side. When you go to buy your bananas, it's not unusual for them to have 4 different common names. So I sell banana plants. And when people come to me and they say they'd like to buy a banana plant, and I said, "Do you have any?" And they say, "Yes." And let's say I ask them what they have, and let's say they have, they tell me they have Better Select, and they see an Orinoco. And they say, "Oh, how much for that?" And I say, "Well, wait a minute, you already have that, because the Orinoco and the Better Select are 2 different names for the same variety." So you might want to do a little research first. The old copy, and we're going back to 1988, Rare Fruit Growers Journal had an excellent, what I call, translator. It listed the variety names. So you can run down and see the different names that the same varieties are commonly sold under. Very helpful. Good stuff, the Rare Fruit Growers publications. All right. I'm very pleased to grow bananas. I'd like to see, hands up, how many of you live in a climate where basically you don't freeze? Maybe once or twice a decade you have 1 or 2 nights, but basically you don't freeze. Yes? Okay, so we're all growing bananas, right? Why not? Okay. When I think back...
Actually, I can tell you why not.
Okay.
For me, it took 1.5 years. I'm literally within spitting distance of the coast. For the bananas, great variety, I got them from some guy in San Diego to mature. 1.5 years, sitting there, I'm twiddling my thumbs. How do you get them to mature? You need more heat, but the problem is if you get inland, they freeze. So how do you deal with that?
You add a large dose of patience. And you take some of the literature that talks about from planting to fruiting in 12 months or 18 months, and you add an extra 12 months to that. I'm sorry, it is not going to be as fast growing your banana here as a friend of mine, Gladys Baird, who grew up in Hawaii. Basically, while I like to think of it as having a great deal of aesthetic quality, I think the arch and the lovely glossy green leaf is incredibly beautiful. So I'm willing to put up with it taking longer to fruit in my yard. But I know from experience that some of the duration to fruiting is not going to prove accurate in San Diego County. And the fact is, how many of us have winters where basically we do get below 55 or into the low 50s for some hours in the winter? How many of us have that? Okay. Well, guess what? The banana kind of responds to that by saying, "I'm not really happy, I'm just sitting here." So, for instance, this pseudostem could unfurl a leaf a week in June as we approach the summer long, warm days. This same pseudostem could slow down and put out 1 leaf for the entire month of December because of short, cooler temperatures. So it is somewhat disappointing if you read some of the literature and you haven't been told it's going to take longer than what they are telling us from Hawaii or Florida. Yes?
Can we still buy gross smart bananas, the trees?
Gross meat.
Gross
I
smart.
would not necessarily recommend it. Number one, I've never seen it in the nurseries, but if you read our CRFG literature, it tends to tell you that it doesn't tend to do well in California, the gross Michael, the big Mike. And I have personally never tried it because number one, I haven't found it available. And number two, I wasn't exactly thrilled with what they were saying about it not doing well in California. So, does anyone have any experience with the gross Michael here in San Diego County? Okay, neither do I. Yes?
Carol, how many do you grow? How many varieties do you grow?
Well, I'm really removed. I'm down to fewer than a dozen now. At one point I had 2 dozen. But I should have kept better care of things. And one time I sold a banana and realized it was my only copy. Oops.
Where are you located?
I'm in Encinitas. I'm 1 3/4 miles from the ocean. So basically, knock on wood, we don't usually freeze. Although when we bought the property 36 years ago, I thought we'd freeze once a decade. We have, let's see, we've had 37 winters, and I think we've actually drifted to freezing about 7 of them, more than I thought when we moved in. Now usually it's just one night, and we feel persecuted.
But do you get enough sunshine? Do you get any coastal fog there?
We do have coastal fog, but we do get sufficient sunlight. Because when we are warming up, when we're away from the Christmas holidays and New Year's, the only memory, as I said, we can pump out a new leaf a week in June. And that is very gratifying. I say my husband could swing in his favorite hammock and watch the leaves unfurl on us. It does appreciably unfold in just a few days. Because of course the new leaf goes up toward the sun, tightly curled, in just a couple of days it unwraps and you have gorgeous new glossy green leaf. And they just tend to get bigger and bigger and bigger as you get warmer and warmer and warmer. Yes?
It looks like you got the right soil. What is your soil?
Oh, well, that's a long history. At one point, my husband rented a jackhammer, and our imitation concrete was removed. And we had, how many truckloads of
It was
Dudley's,
compacted sandstone.
yeah, Dudley's finest dairy maneuver trucked in. And that was at an early day in the neighborhood where you can open the door and say, oh, somebody had soil amendment brought in, close the door. Because it definitely smelled like a dairy. So we have put quite a few hours in to amend our soil. Because like many housing tracts, what was anything close to topsoil went bye-bye in the grading. We didn't have any topsoil by the time we moved into the house.
Yeah, we're on cut.
Yeah. And part of it is really compacted, and we jackhammered it loose.
So that compost that you get from the recycling center would be?
Well, we started out with Dudley's finest, supposedly aged compost dairy manure, but it was obviously of a personality where it wasn't completely composted. Now we have a great resource. Mariatava in Oceanside, El Corazon, has great finished compost. So you don't have to think you're moving next to a dairy anymore. But in the early days of our neighborhood, you could get away with having a dump of dairy manure put on your driveway, and the neighbors wouldn't say boo, because we were all working hard, because anyone into gardening realized we were going to have to work.
Don't forget, CRFG gets a discount.
Pardon?
CRFG gets a discount.
Yes, I think we've all been told that how many of those will CRFG members be able to get for free, Corey?
Pardon me?
We can get,
Well, she didn't give a cap, so.
okay. But does everyone know that as a CRFG member, you can go to El Corazon and Oceanside and get a free load of dairy manure, right? Or is it mulch?
Compost.
Or either one, compost.
I think
I'm sorry.
you have to
Compost.
shovel it yourself, though, I think.
Yeah, you will need
Yeah.
a shovel, and heads up, of course, don't forget to take a tarp, a wrap, because she doesn't want you to drive out of there without it covered, because you get a ticket, and then she'd get a complaint from the powers that be, because we don't want things blowing out and causing accidents. Yes.
I have a pickup truck, and I go there and I give them $10, and they get one of those big skip loaders, and they just dump it on my truck, and when I get done, it's piled as high as the bed would go. And so for $10, you don't have to shovel it, you know, they just give and they.
For a fee, they'll load it. Or you can
And that's
load it
really
yourself.
good compost. It's high in humic acid. It's completely composted. It's really good.
Mary
stuff.
Matava has a degree, an advanced degree in agricultural sciences, so she knows her stuff.
Yeah,
Yes.
she does.
Is that organic or not? I
Yes.
was concerned that it was organic.
Now, she's taking materials that may have at one time been sprayed, yes. But remember, by the time something breaks down to finish compost, I like people to envision pesticides, molluscicides, fungicides, herbicides as being megamolecules. And by the time you finish your composting, they've broken down into smaller atoms. And they're not exactly nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but they're closer to those elements that you'd actually pay for in bagged fertilizer than they are to the original toxic atom in a herbicide or molluscicide or insecticide. So there are two definitions of organic.
Yeah.
Yes, it's organic under the pure science chemistry because it all came from what was at one time alive. And no, it isn't necessarily organic in that at one point somebody may have sprayed the grass with a herbicide and cut that grass and sent it to Mary Matava's place for composting.
I know, that's why I was concerned.
It's
The
called
only-
certified organic.
It's certified.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
certified organic, yeah.
All right, so someone has decided after you hold it for a long enough period of time that it is,
Carol, for
Yes.
growing bananas, there's really nothing better than the Mountain Meadows mushroom farm.
that is good stuff, yes.
It's just, and free.
And of course, how many of us, we're all composting all of our green waste, right, everybody? Hands up? Yes? Yes? Okay. Because bananas love compost. The fact is, very often you read about giving them the best advantage. They like a lot of nitrogen. And some of the literature will talk about, it's believed, the speed with which the banana pseudostem, because remember, we want to call this a trunk, but we shouldn't, because we shouldn't even call this a banana tree, because it's not woody. This is not a tree, it's a banana plant, it's non-woody. This is a pseudostem, not a woody trunk. The speed with which this grows up and puts out, some authors say 44 and some say 46 leaves. They say directly relates to what will finally be the bloom, pushing up to the center. In other words, this wimpy thing, which should have been much bigger, but anyway, will come up at the center after you produce 44 or 46 leaves. Within 24 hours, it will start to arch over. And many authors will tell you the size of your bloom, which will impact the number of hands, the number of fingers you get, will be related to the speed with which you put on the 44 or 46 leaves.
The speed?
In other words, you want a lot of nitrogen to encourage it to grow fast, and you want as much as possible to stay above low 50s. Now, we can't really stay above low 50s. Some of the neighborhoods we live in, we're not in southern Florida and Hawaii, we're going to dip to the low 50s for multiple hours in the winter, and we can't help that. But we can help the fact that we can put a lot of nitrogen in the soil. Now, we can do that multiple ways. Of course, when you go and buy fertilizer, and you're looking at stuff like triple 15, or citrus and avocado, maybe 10% nitrogen or 12% nitrogen, you know, that's pretty strong nitrogen. And then you're saying, well, why is she talking about compost? That's only like 2% nitrogen. True. But when you put the compost in the soil and you're amending, let's say, half of your digging hole volume-wise with compost, you're putting an incredible quantity of nitrogen in the soil. It may not be a high percentage at 2% compared to the triple 15, but there's a whole lot of nitrogen there. And again, of course, the banana, its roots really spread, but they don't go deep. So if you do find that, as we did, that our soil wasn't river basin of the Mississippi, it needed some work if it was going to be healthy growth medium for roots. Yes, you may dig some holes, but you don't have to dig deep. You may dig laterally wide and enrich with a lot of your homemade compost, or go to Mary Matava's place. And you can still, of course, add chemical fertilizers in addition. Now, there's no fertilizer out there that says banana food, but citrus and avocado food is fine. I've used everything from citrus and avocado food, which was like 12 or 10% nitrogen, the particular brand I bought, to urea, which is 46% nitrogen. Now, obviously, when I'm using urea, I'm a little more careful, because that's kind of hot. I'm applying it a little lighter. And when you do scratch it into the soil, be careful in that these are superficial roots. You don't want to dig hard with your digging claw, because you would mess up the roots. So gently massage it in with your digging claw. And I've used stuffed fish emulsion, and they are not picky eaters, in other words. They do like a lot of nitrogen, but they're not picky eaters. You had a question here?
Say something about watering them. They take water.
Okay. Unfortunately, they're going to want more water than your succulents. Fact of life. But I look at it this way. What's more worthwhile to put water on than food, right? And if you want a luscious fruit, it's going to cost you some water, right? Okay. But on the feeling good green side, okay. If we buy bananas only from commercial sources, they're coming from what? The three top producers, I think, are
Honduras.
Ecuador, Costa Rica, and Honduras has now fallen to third. They used to be the top before. But, okay. Ecuador, Costa Rica, and Honduras, the three top producers. That is how many miles away? Hundreds, thousands of miles, over 1,000 miles away. That's going to cost you a whole lot of energy, as opposed to if we grow it in our own yards, maybe we do have to put water on it, but we can still feel green about it because we don't have to invest the incredible energy it takes to move the bananas all the way from Honduras or Ecuador or Costa Rica. Yes?
So do they like to be pretty wet?
They like good drainage, actually. They don't really want clay. They like good drainage, but they don't like to go dry. Now, it's interesting because the literature will tell you they can go dry, and aesthetically they can look pretty good, but it will impact your fruit. You won't get as many fingers to eat.
In more water than a equivalent like citrus tree of that size? Would you
Oh,
say?
I think equivalent to about what a citrus it would be happy with. But that's a whole lot more than your succulents.
Yeah.
Or if anybody into native plants, yes, it's going to cost you more than your native plants in water. But as I said, I think it's the best investment if you're going to grow something in your yard. What's more justifiable to put water on than food? Yes.
As far as ripening is concerned, how long a period of time can you have fruit to eat? Does it all come in 1 week, or does it have a month, 2 months?
Well, maybe not 2 months, but more than a week. It's going to vary with how well you do, as far as the number of fingers. For instance, there was a bad winter for us. It was, I don't remember exactly which year. I had 3 different varieties with a stalk of fruit on them. And overnight, unfortunately, these were the varieties in the ground. So my loving husband, I couldn't Shanghai him and help me drag all the pots into the garage like I usually do. Okay, so these 3 clusters of fruit were exposed to the freezing. And of course, 24 hours later, what was left leaf-wise was just ruined on those pseudostems. Now, one of the pseudostems just, there was nothing left leaf-wise, and it just didn't mature any of the fruit. The other one was my own fault, and it kinked. I should have, which is, yes, do take precautions. When you get a cluster of fruit, it's heavy. Do support it. That was my fault. I hadn't supported it, and it kinked. And then when I tried to splint it, it didn't really work. Now, the 3rd cluster had 70 fingers on it. I actually counted them. And I was really heartbroken because it was a very nice long cluster, 70 fingers of cardiva. And I was looking forward to that. And of course, all the leaves were ruined because we had the freeze that one night. And I was going, oh dear, I don't know. We'll just hang in there and see. So the pseudostem that's supporting the fruit looked as ugly as could be as far as the leaves were ruined. But it did have some of the next generation around it. And you know that the bananas grow from a subterranean rhizome, of course. So these younger plants, which I had picked out to be the next generation, they still had leaves that looked pretty good. They were tucked underneath some of the shelter of the bigger leaves, and they were closer to the ground, and their leaves weren't nearly impacted by the cold. And they were still photosynthesizing. And they were sending nutrients to the common rhizome, and they nourished this cluster of fruit. And even though I would go out, and I'd read in my CRFG literature that, okay, once it peeps, sends out the blossom, hopefully within 4 months, 5 months, you would have ripe fruit. Of course, that would be if they'd read the literature and they'd bloom for you in the spring with long, warm days. And they don't always do that. So this one was getting 4 months came and went, 5 months, 6 months. Not a single banana was ripe. They weren't rotting or turning black, but they were still as green as grass because we'd had this freeze. Now, fortunately, they had been fully sized by the time we had the freeze, which gave them a little bit more oomph than the other cluster that I lost. So one day my smart aleck husband comes home and he's purchased bananas at the store and he's taken the Chiquita sticker off and he sticks it on this cluster of bananas that are as green as grass. And he doesn't tell me. So I go out, my daily, check the bananas and give them their little pep talk and how are you doing and you need water, and they're Chiquita stickers all over these green as grass bananas. I said, ha ha ha, I know who did that, ha ha ha, very funny. Wouldn't you know, within a week, the first finger in that cluster starts to turn yellow. And wouldn't you know, it was one of the fingers that he'd stuck the Chiquita sticker on. So he likes to tell it, well, it had a personality identity crisis. It forgot it was a banana. It forgot it was supposed to turn yellow. And sure enough, that banana, that finger turned yellow. And 2 days later, the one next to it starts to turn yellow. Because you know, as bananas ripen, they give off naturally ethylene gas, which helps ripen the adjacent fruit, which is one reason when you buy green bananas in the market and you want to speed them ripening at home on the counter, put them in a brown paper bag with, like, if you have an apple, that's a good source of ethylene gas. So pretty soon, bing, 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 each of those 70 fingers did ripen. Now it took multiple weeks, about, I think maybe a month from the first finger we ate to the end. Not 2 months, but a month. So I was thrilled because I had waited way beyond the time I had expected it to mature, and I wasn't sure it was going to ripen any fruit at all. But it did. Although I would certainly have preferred if it had bloomed in the spring as opposed to in the fall, and then we might have moved along a lot faster.
A question?
Yes.
When I raised them, I was never sure whether it was better to let them ripen on the plant or hang the stem in the garage.
You read about hanging the stem in the garage.
Well, I just did it.
But-
I saw people do it. I didn't read it. I just saw-
I don't know that that's really, supposedly the top of the garage with heat rises and it's going to be warmer, but I don't see how that's going to be warmer than putting them in the house, frankly.
But I guess my real question is, you talk like you let them ripen when the stem is still on the plant. Is that what you're saying?
I very often just let them ripen on the plant
Okay.
and just will pick what I want for that day or the next 2 or 3 days.
But insects will attract.
I don't seem to have any problem with insects. And despite what the literature says, knock on wood, I haven't had any trouble with rats. But I have at Quail Gardens seen rat-damaged bananas hanging on the plants. So now maybe I'm patting myself on the back too much, I don't know. I like to groom my plants. Now if you groom your plants and you cut off the old leaves, you make less of an access, I think, for the rats to get up.
Right.
And less of a hiding place for them to feel secure and eat your fruit. Because, well, how many of you are helping at Quail Gardens? Anybody going to the, okay. And I hope you're grooming the banana plants, because the work part is only once a month, and believe me, the bananas would look much better if they're groomed at least once a month, because those old leaves, which can be worked to an advantage. When the leaf of a banana, for instance, here's a leaf that's getting a little old, and this is healthy, but it naturally starts to get yellow. Now eventually the whole leaf will be yellow, eventually be brown, and it'll droop down. Now the advantage to this is, how many of you have pools or ponds in your property? And you've been kind of annoyed because other trees will drop their leaves and they're always flying into your pools or your pond? The banana doesn't do that. Its leaves just turn brown, slump down. And before they get brown and really, really ugly, you can cut them off. Which is one reason I brought 2 of these today. I like to talk about the fact that as you're waiting for the magic 44 or 46 leaves, and then finally the flower to come out of the top, you may find that the older leaves do eventually turn chartreuse and finally brown, and long before they turn brown, you may want to trim them off because they have a lot of aesthetic appeal if they are groomed routinely. However, how do you do that? Actually, it's very simple. You just take a pair of scissors and cut. Let's say this was totally yellow. I would pull this away from the pseudostem and I would cut with scissors. Now I found, to preserve my sanity, because at first I tried to cut it level, and you always miss, and it's hard to do. But if you decide to cut it at an angle, and if I look at it from above, I decide I'm going to go in a clockwise direction, each of the cuts. When you cut it, the cut area, as you can see on this one, which hasn't been groomed in a while, which is why I brought it into contrast. This one I cut yesterday, and it's nice and clean looking, and I wiped it. This one hasn't been trimmed in over a week. The cut area turns necrotic and brown. But if you cut at the same angle, you see here, it looks nicer than if you just cut helter-skelter. And if you try and cut it level, you drive yourself crazy. It's much too hard to get it level. So even though this hasn't been groomed recently, it's still more attractive if the old leaves are removed and if you cut it in like a spiral pattern. Yes?
When you said it has to have 46 leaves before it flowers,
They say 44 or 46, they debate.
all at one time or in the life of
In the lifespan of the pseudostem.
So as you're cutting them off, you start counting when you've got your...
I've never really bothered to do that.
How long
but-
does it take from that size?
Oh, when people get this size, first thing I ask, okay, are you frost-free? Yes, okay. Are you going to give this an all-day sun exposure? Because that's important too. And then I tell them, okay, hopefully in about 12, 15 months, this should be flowering. Now, unfortunately, if you flower in the fall or the winter, you're just going to kind of sit there forever until it warms up and the fruit really starts to ripen.
So you want to flower in the spring or summer?
Ideally, you'd go out with your calendar and say, okay, it's spring, let's flower, but they don't listen to you.
So there's not a standard time when...
No, that's the
when it
interesting
has to flower?
thing, not being a tree, not being woody. They kind of are exceptions to all these, what we consider general common sense rules. They don't have a blossom period where you can go out and you're going to expect the blossoms. No, they can blossom any time of the year It just has to do with number of leaves and bingo. Now, they're more apt to blossom in the warmer season because they're punching out more leaves. Because if you only punch out one leaf in December, unless it's the magic 45 or 46, then the next thing isn't going to be the blossom.
Is it fruit just once a year though?
Actually, this isn't so much a deficit as the fact something you have to get used to. They only fruit once.
And their whole life?
Each pseudostem only fruits once. So when you pick the last of the fingers, and you can do it my way and pick a few bananas at a time, or you can go ahead and you can pick the whole cluster if you want, and put it in the house where it's warm, or if you want to get out the ladder and hang it in the rafters of the garage. But I don't really think the rafters of the garage are going to be warmer than putting it in the warmth of the house, which is why I've never bothered to hang it in the garage. But it said that once you pick the last of the fruit, some literature will tell you cut it down to 3 feet, and they think the pseudostem nutrients can be retracted back into the rhizome to help nourish the rest of the plant. I did that. That was hideously ugly. Once you pick the last of the fruit, chop it off at ground level.
Well, what about the babies that are coming up? What if 2 or 3 are coming up? Are you supposed to wait until they get big and then repot each one separately?
Now, the cups, which is what they call the little shoots from the common rhizome, are supposed to be limited, so you don't have too many growing at one time. Now, unfortunately, in one of my plantings, I haven't practiced birth control. It has way too many pups. So I'm ready to go out there and dig a whole lot of pups, because I have a lot of them. But I should have limited it so that I would wait. For instance, I have some slightly larger specimens. They're 10-gallon pots. They're a little bit taller than this. And they have a few inch tall pups. Because at that stage, I feel it's okay for it to have a pup or 2. And they will succeed this. When you cut this down, by the time you finish picking the last of the fruit, hopefully you cut this down. Hopefully you would have one ideally that would be like half grown, and then another one maybe quarter grown, or at least a few inches.
But you leave them together, you don't separate them?
Now, if you want to, you can go ahead and separate them, because maybe you want to put another planting over another part of the yard. Or maybe you want to swap with a friend who has a different variety, and you want to increase the number of varieties you have.
Do they just pull off, or do you have to cut them?
I have a technique I like to refer to as the gopher technique. Okay, I get in my husband's old trousers and my son's old shirt, and I get my knees down in the dirt, and I dig all the way around the little pup that I want to move. Let's say I want to put this pup in a pot and sell it, or I want to put it in another bed somewhere else. So I dig all the way around, and I don't have to dig too deep because they are shallow. The rhizome, you go down 18 inches and you're going to have most of the roots. And the rhizome, isn't even going to be, 12 inches deep, probably. So dig all around it like a gopher would do, but not into the corm. And then you can find the smallest connection point to the master, the larger portion of the rhizome. And I take both hands and I start pushing it in every direction. And you can hear an audible crack. And if you use this technique, it's a little slower than the other technique I'll talk about, but my gopher technique allows you to crack the corm of the plant you want to transplant and make minimal sized wound. And I think it's worth getting your knees in the dirt and making minimal wound. Then you lift it up out of the ground, you have a nice corm, minimal wound, it has a lot of roots, and it's ready to go into your pot, or ready to go into your new garden site, or give it to a friend. Now, the other approach you'll frequently read about in the literature is you just take a root cutting shovel, and let's say here's your pup, and here's mother pseudostem, and you go whack! And yeah, you can get a corm and you can transplant it, but you inevitably, because you don't have x-ray vision, you make a much bigger wound than if you'd taken the time to use the gopher approach. So it may set it back a little bit. It works, and it's a lot faster if that's the way you want to do it.
Is that how you start these?
With these, I usually, well, these were actually this and its sister and another specimen were all sharing a 15-gallon pot. And it was getting ridiculous. I mean, the pot looked like it was going to burst. It was pushing out the sides. So on the 29th of May, I pushed the 15-gallon pot over on its side. And I do what I call practice banana CPR. I put my hands like this, and I push on the side of the pot, and I roll it 90 degrees and push again. So you can see the root ball of the pot is pushed away from the side of the pot. And then I just grab this and envision it as being tilted over horizontally and pull it out of the pot. And that way it comes out with minimal damage. And then I start to massage the soil around it. And I can readily see the smallest connection point that this was attached to the mother rhizome, and this was attached to the mother rhizome. And I just, minimal damage, put them in their own pots and And they've actually grown quite a bit since the 29th of May, since I put them in here. And I put the mother plant back in the 15-gallon with some more fresh compost, and she's doing great.
So you can actually go to fruit in a pot? You can go to fruit?
It's not recommended, in that when I've had them too long in pots, and sometimes I have this, the banana blossom tends to come out small and wimpy like this. But if you are putting some bananas aside, because the city of Encinitas hopes to have a community garden, and when I spoke with a friend of mine, he's not sure in 6 months whether they'll be ready to plant, but I do have 5 varieties that are okay for that garden. Now, I don't think they'll flower before then. And I hope they'll forgive me because I only put them in 10-gallon pots as opposed to the bigger, I have a couple mega pots. But then even my husband's van would have trouble moving them. So we'll see. Yes?
How do bananas do as a greenhouse plant?
Oh, well, if you want to tweak it, I've given some of my children to Kew Garden. And there was a gentleman from Kew Garden ages ago, had come to Quail Gardens, and we knew in advance, and he was interested in acquiring some banana varieties, because he said they had some banana plants in the palm house, but they only had 2 cultivars, and they wanted to expand. And at the time, the bananas at Quail weren't too well established. It wasn't too long after we put in Banana Boulevard and really planted intensely that area. And I just dug up some of mine at home, because I knew basically he wanted relatively small plants anyway, because he was going to have to put them on the airplane and take them back to, London. So I guess they did fine, because he controls the temperature over there and the light, and he was growing all these exotic palms, which have been certainly as fussy as any bananas I gave him, as far as the heat and the light duration. So if you have a Kew Garden simulation, yes. Now, I did sell a banana one time to a woman in Ramona, and usually I tease people that I don't sell bananas to people in Ramona. Not that I'm picking on Ramona, but of course Ramona is not frost-free. But we spoke, and she asked me to hear her out. She had a south-facing picture window in her living room with a big cathedral ceiling, and she wanted it for the aesthetics. And I couldn't argue with her, because I love the arch, and I love the glossy green. And we spoke about the fact that eventually it would flower, but it probably wouldn't set much of any fruit. But she was okay with that. She wanted it for a giant houseplant. So, okay, I can't argue, it is pretty.
They don't fruit at all if there is any kind of frost, or?
Well, they may. The cardiva I had did mature all 70 fingers, even though we had a freak winter and we dipped to 32. But part of it was the bananas were about full size at that point, fortunately.
How much of a frost could they take?
It does vary with varieties.
Okay.
Even our literature will warn, and it'll say repeatedly, they say Orinoco, they think, is one of the more cold-resistant varieties. And for what it's worth, Orinoco, and this gets confusing, is a plantain under the genetic definition. Because you have 2 definitions for the word plantain. The one definition of plantain under the kitchen science is a banana that's starchy and really has to be cooked before you can consume it, which is what most of the world eats, is the cooking banana. That's why it's such an important food stock. Most people are eating this as a substitute for what my Irish American ancestors had as potatoes. Okay. But when we talk about garden science and we say bananas, the other genetic definition is a plantain is any banana that has acuminata, because we're talking Musa acuminata was crossed with Musa balbisiana. So it has genes from both species. So that's a plantain. Now, some of them, if you allow them to soften, will be very good and sweet eating out of hand, like the Orinoco. Yes?
When you cut a pup off, should you allow it to dry?
Oh, I hear repeated in literature that when you sever it, you're supposed to allow it to dry for like 24 or 48 hours. And I thought, okay. But very often I just pop it into the pot. And I experimented with that, and I haven't had any ill effects. But I have always been lucky in that I've had minimal wound size, because I used the gopher approach. Now, if I had a bigger wound, maybe it would be more important to let it dry, so to speak, before I popped it in. Because maybe if I didn't, maybe that larger wound would rot if I popped it right into the soil.
What variety is that and how big will it get?
Well, this is Orinoco, which again is called Better Select. And interestingly enough, in the market, they always call the fruit burro. But when you go to the nursery to buy the plant, it's always called Better Select or Orinoco, and they never use the term burro. So there's this disconnect, which I don't like, because I like to go to the market. I would like to know what variety of peach I was buying. Or, I mean, if you go to buy apples, they label them. But you go to buy peaches, and it's a yellow peach, lady. It's a white peach. That's the best you do. You know, it's a freestone. That's the best you do. And bananas.
That's getting technical.
Yeah, that's if you can run down the produce man. So
What?
it's hard sometimes to get the information you want. And we are a little more demanding as rare fruit growers. It's of interest to us, but not of interest to enough people for the stores to bother to label things more clearly, unfortunately. Yes?
I only have 2 banana plants, but they turned into just a big jungle because I have it in the end of an avocado row. And
it has good sun,
oh my
and
goodness.
good soil, and regular water.
And lots
And
of
it's
water. And it gives a lot of fruit, but the pups, I let everything grow wild. And so what I do is I put a cord around about 6 foot, and it has a black poly it's outside of the cord, so it protects the banana. And I keep that because everything falls over otherwise, and it keeps because the bananas are from like me to you. It's just a big jungle where I put the initial plant like that in the middle. They just I never took a pup out. I guess I'm doing something wrong.
No, if you're happy with the
It's
amount
just a
of
jungle,
production.
but it gives a lot of fruit.
Okay, if you give a lot of fruit, then obviously you can't argue with success. That's great.
It gets the same thing as the avocados get.
Okay.
Same fertilizer, same everything.
But I did also want to mention, though, some varieties, while they're plantains genetically, because they have acuminata and babyciana genes, and there is some discussion in the literature about babyciana imparting more cold hardiness. There are other varieties, such as Cuban red, or the one that's called Puerto Rican red or Jamaican red, depending on where you grew up. It's the same variety, by the way. And it's just called red for short. It's straight acuminata. It's triploid, straight acuminata genes. It's wimpy. I sold that to somebody in Del Mar and somebody in Point Loma. But usually when people come to buy me bananas from me, I usually guide them away from that because that's a little more cold sensitive because it's straight acuminata genes. It doesn't have the babyciana genes. Yes?
Let's assume you had a decent piece of land and you could plant a plantation. What would be appropriate spacing for sun, air, enough puffs to come out to avoid, what this gentleman was talking about?
Well, I think his complication was the avocados were dumping leaves on your bananas, right?
Oh, it's just a jungle. I don't make it look pretty like that one. I don't do anything to it. I just harvested it.
Yeah, your aesthetics, you don't care what it
Yeah,
looks like.
nobody sees it.
Because you can plant them relatively close together, but it is advised that you have a walkable row between. Now, I like to get in and actually groom.
What was that banana farm up in Oxnard?
Yes, but Doug Richardson's
Doug
no
Richardson.
longer there,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, tell them about that area.
Well, Doug Richardson, a CRFG member, successfully was growing bananas at Carpinteria? Seaside Nursery. And I guess one year, he had a bad run of things. 1 year, half the hillside kind of came down.
Yeah,
Because I guess we had a lot of rains. We don't want to be ungrateful for the rains, but it did move a lot of soil and damage. And then another year, what was it with Doug? He didn't own the property, he leased it, was that the problem?
Yeah, there was something about, there was a change of ownership or something that they, I don't know, maybe there was some remediation relative to the bluffs coming off too. But we're right at the base of the bluff into the I don't know, you really call it an alluvial area, but it certainly had, the bluff had broken down, and I'm not sure whether there was a problem with the soil shifting or what it was, but there was some trauma involved in the...
Because
closing of that nursery.
I got the impression he wasn't there too long after the hillside slid.
Yeah. And I
And
bought
he's not
some
there
there,
now for years.
Once upon a time, and I found out that they were selling, the best ones were going to restaurants or whatever, and the ones that were left over were the great ones that wouldn't ripen. And it, you know, even off the stock, there were a couple of small ones and that I tried, and only one or two out of the half dozen that got really turned into a reasonable banana. So I think that he found a market that was taking his better crop, and that he was selling them off at his stand there for the innocent.
And if you ever had the fortune to drive up there, because, I mean, the only thing between him and the beach when he had the seaside nursery was, what was it, Highway 101? I mean, he was practically, not exactly in the surf, but only one road width removed from it. He had them planted cheek to jowls, basically, and he was doing great.
Yeah, they were just lanes, harvesting
Yes.
lanes.
Do birds like them?
I've never had any trouble with birds bothering them at all. And also, I've had very few problems with insects bothering the leaves, which is nice. Now, I know that in 1992, we unfortunately had the giant whitefly move north of the border. And you know, everyone will tell you, giant whitefly's favorite food is, of course, the hibiscus, right? And then I used to joke, and its second favorite food is the banana. Because after 1992, there was this extra fun job. I would always carry a rag going out to talk to my bananas, and I would find patches of the giant whitefly that had settled on the underside, and I would wipe them off. But for the last several years, that has lightened up. And the beneficial insects we have started to develop a taste for the giant whitefly, and it's no longer the curse it used to be on the hibiscus or the bananas, fortunately. And at least on the bananas, when you did find the giant whitefly, it was very easy to wipe off.
With bananas, they like the sun, but they don't like the wind, correct?
Okay,
That's the problem I have.
that's why I brought this, not the prettiest specimen. Okay, this is a banana leaf, and it has a strong midrib, and you see the smaller ribs perpendicular to the midrib. They are designed, shall we say, I like to use the term, because I like marketing terms, I guess, it fringes. You have to look at this and think, fringe, not tatter. Okay, now remember, where the bananas grow commercially, basically 20 degrees north and 20 degrees south of the equator, they are massaged by hurricanes. And they have adapted, so to speak, evolved, so that this leaf, even though it's kicked around and massaged by a hurricane, and even though it looks quite fringed, still retains its photosynthetic possibility, its green color. So unfortunately, the problem is mostly up here with us. We have to adapt and see fringe and not tatter. So just because you have a windy location doesn't mean you can't plant a banana there. If we can just overcome this anxiety about fringe.
When you read the basic articles, they always say, oh, they're wind sensitive, that's why I say.
Well, they are going to be impacted by the wind, but not necessarily negatively.
Good.
And think about it, hurricanes? That's a whole lot more wind than we're ever going to submit them to.
Hopefully.
Now, right, did I say the wrong thing? Am I tempting fate? Okay. Now, obviously, as I referred to earlier, when you do get your fruiting session, it's heavy. And then you do need to stake it. Because even then, a mild wind can end up causing it to crimp over. But this is, I actually had someone come to buy a banana from me one time, and they said, oh, they were going to put it on the north side of the house because it was nice wind sheltered. And I talked to them, and I hope I talked them out of it. I said, no, the north side is cold, and it's shadowed. And it's almost always, if you put it that close to the north side, the root mass is going to be in the cold dirt. You know, when I don't like it, it's dirt. When it's good, it's soil. So I tried to put them in a sunny location where the soil would be warmed by the kiss of the sun, even if it did get a little massaging from the wind, which was going to be healthier for their plant. But they also had this mindset that they wanted a wind-sheltered area, which wasn't necessary. Yes?
What pollinates them?
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. Everyone over 17? We can talk sex ed. It's parthenocarpic. It doesn't get pollinated. Isn't that neat? Botanists feel that the banana basically gave up sex about 10,000 years ago. Yeah, but it's interesting. Okay, this blossom.
There are some tropical kinds, because I remember my sister living in Thailand, and she talked about bananas with seeds.
Oh, yes.
So there are some.
There are some that are fertile, and we will tweak them, and I can talk about that, and then you can have psychological debates whether you agree with genetically modifying food or not genetically modifying it, or whether it's worth it because we're going to use fewer pesticides or it's not worth it ever. But okay, this blossom and peeps out the top, and 24 hours it arches over. And the first sepal almost always has no flowers underneath it, and it falls off relatively quickly. The next sepal will have hopefully more flowers than this. And these are female flowers. And if everything goes well, in other words, you didn't freeze and it has full sun and it's getting regular water and good soil, these will start making fingers. And you'll get anywhere from 5 to 12 hands worth of female flowers. And then you revert to...
Which the hummingbirds love.
Oh yes, if you're into hummingbird attracting, this is a great plant. Thank you. What about that? And then, would you hold this up for me? Sure. Okay. Okay, so here we have female, 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 female. What are these worthless things? The male flowers. And more worthless. Well, it's not worthless to the hummingbird, as my husband referred. They will come and sip the nectar. And this will fall off in a day, exposing new flowers with more nectar. Now, some varieties, for instance, the Orinoco, is neater in that the male flowers will fall, and this will be nice and tidy. Other varieties, the male flowers adhere, and it looks kind of messy. Commercially, of course, once it stops with the female flowers, they will go in the grove and they'll chop this off, because the male flowers, unless you're in the Honduran research station, or there's a research station in the Cameroon, the male flowers that are of no value, because it's parthenocarpic. It doesn't need the male. It's the, as I say, the ultimate women's female liberation. Now, totally unnecessary, except hummingbird food. And they will cut this off because they feel the energy to keep putting male flowers out takes away from the energy that might make bigger fingers. Now, whether you cut it off or not is totally between you and your hummingbirds. And of course, it might be impacted on whether you have a variety where it retains the male flowers and looks kind of unsightly, or whether the male flowers completely fall off and it looks nice and neat. Yes?
Are there any insecticides that we should never use on bananas?
Oh, there are lots of insecticides that you never use. Remember the last time I had to wipe off giant whitefly on the underside of leaves. They're just not the problem they used to be. And as far as, I've never seen the grasshoppers chew on this. Apparently it isn't to their liking. The snails, I've never seen snails go up this.
I've
The
had
insects.
snails in them.
Pardon?
When I've heard that I've had snails in them, but
Oh,
I've never
hiding.
seen them damage anything.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think they like the flavor or the texture. And fortunately, insects don't tend to find this a good meal. Yes?
I had ants invade my banana plants and they brought tons of scale with them.
Oh. Now, I have frequently enough found ants in that when I go to make this look pretty, and I pull this cut edge away from the pseudostem, and I cut it, the bark, the brown necrotic tissue off, frequently enough, I will find ants hiding in there. But I can't see they're doing any damage. But I've never had a scale problem. So I'm sorry to hear that you had that complication with it.
I had to take my plants out of the soil and put them in pots so away from the ants.
What type of ants?
They were just the little
Little
Argentine.
Argentine bull.
Because I see them sometimes hiding in this area. But I can't say that I've ever seen any damage. And usually when I cut this off and I just wipe it, and that's the end of them. It's not like they have a steady stream going up here. They're just a limited number, and they're hiding.
Carol?
Yes.
Somebody asked about greenhouse. Now, when I had Orinoco, that thing got to be 16 feet tall.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't talk about the height. Yes, the Orinoco can get tall, so make sure your greenhouse is a pretty good height.
Mine got 16 feet tall and shaded all my trees.
Yes. Now, there is the dwarf Orinoco.
Oh.
Neil, you have expertise on the dwarf Orinoco, don't you? What would you say the mature height of the dwarf Orinoco is?
8 feet.
Okay. So there are some varieties.
That fruit belongs to this? The
Uh,
fruit is
This,
Orinoco,
This is probably Tai gold, which is not Orinoco.
And
Would you raise the specimen you had? Steve, you had
Oh, the fruit?
the one piece of fruit.
It's on the back table now.
Oh, okay. There's I'm gonna go get it because it's fine. Called Burro, which is Orinoco. And it's distinctive in that almost all the varieties, other than Cavendish, are gonna be shorter in length, as far as the ones you find in the market. And the Orinoco or the Burro is kind of rigid, you see? Which is very different looking than this, although that isn't mature yet.
It looks like a cooking banana.
Many people do cook this. It is okay to cook, but if you wait till it's soft, it's a perfectly good sweet-eating dessert banana. And I wanted to mention, though, with the fact that the Cavendish, okay, is resistant to Panama disease race 1, but did I tell you in 1992, race 4, Panama disease and black sigatuga, and Cavendish isn't resistant. So all the more reason for us to get out and grow our own varieties. And we don't want to grow Cavendish, we want to grow something more intense in flavor, like the Orinoco. When I eat this, I taste apple essence. Of course, I made the mistake of reading a description, and the author said, ooh, you might have a wonderful intense flavor with essence of apple. That set my mind up for it. Yes.
What about gophers?
Pardon?
What about your gophers?
Oh, unfortunately, gophers love relatively soft, relatively juicy subterranean plant parts. That's a banana rhizome. They love bananas. So, yes, if you have gophers, and ancient history, when we were planting Banana Boulevard at Quail Gardens, we actually went out and bought hardware cloth, which is a wire mesh. Even though it says cloth, it's actually a wire mesh, about a 1/4 inch size. And we lined the holes. Now remember, fortunately, this isn't as difficult as it sounds, because we only went down 18 inches, because most of the roots are going to be shallower than 18 inches. It's a shallow rooting plant. But we gave a nice wide bed to it, because we didn't have gopher situation at that time. And we knew they were going to raise their ugly heads. And they can totally kill your bananas. I was with a friend from Rare Fruit Growers, and another rare fruit grower had generously donated some of her bananas to a function we were going to have. We just had to go and pick them up and pot them up and take them to a sale. This is ancient history. Well, we went out to her place, and right away, we could see gopher mountains. And we started to dig some of her bananas, and unfortunately, one of them, and it was almost this size, you could just lift up out of the ground. There wasn't any corn left to speak of. It had been breakfast, lunch, and dinner for gophers. So yeah, gophers can be devastating. More so possibly to bananas than to hard, woody, rooting plants. Yes?
Do all those fingers grow at the same rate, or they grow like bigger from top down, or?
The literature will tell you that the topmost bananas are going to mature first. I haven't always found that. They don't always read the books. The upper bananas will mature earlier, but it isn't always the topmost hand. And the bottom bananas, the hand in the bottom tend to be a little bit smaller than the previous hands. So, I mean, logically, the first hand would mature first because it's the oldest, but I frequently found the second hand maturing even before not by a great deal of time difference, but a few days before even the top hand turned yellow. I might find the second hand starting to turn yellow. Yes?
How old are they for production start, and what's the typical lifespan for producing banana?
Well, if we were in Hawaii, and some of our CRFG literature will talk about planting a little pup and getting it in flowering in only 12 to 18 months, but we're not, because in the winter we're going to dip into the low 50s. So I tell people to add 12 months to that. And then, of course, each pseudostem is only going to flower once. Of course, the flower hopefully will have many, many hands, anywhere from like 5 to 12 hands of female fruiting bananas. But when you pick the last of that, or if you take the whole cluster, then you might as well come in and chop this off, because actually at that time this isn't going to look great. The fact is that once you start putting the energy into making the fingers, you're not putting out any more leaves. the 44 or the 46 leaves, whatever the magic number is the experts debate about, that's it. It isn't like the flower comes out and then it puts out more leaves, no. By the time you have these fingers turning yellow, what's left up here is going to be kind of, shall we say, worn out. It's going to look, you know, even worse than this as far as more yellow and more brown in it. So when you pick the fruit, you'll be happy to take this out completely. But hopefully you will already have had the replacement generation growing up at the same time this was reaching for its fruiting age.
Does the corm keep getting bigger and bigger?
Mm-hmm. Although there are occasions where parts of it will rot. And sometimes you may actually have a separation. Years down the road, part of the rot, let's say in the center of the planting, may have been such that the section over here has its own corm or rhizome from the section over here because there was enough rot to separate them. But at least they start out initially all as, what do you call it, when twins are conjoined? Siamese twins, yes.
How do you get rid of, the old stem is spent, doesn't compost, it doesn't seem to ever go.
I compost it.
It just takes time. It seems.
Well, it's not that, actually, this is not woody, so it composts fairly quickly. The only thing is,
Keep it damp, I guess.
Look, dressed here deliberately. Okay, it's not as bad as it could be. Okay, do you all see that stain? You know what that's
Banana
from?
juice.
Okay, Carol was foolish. We had a function, and I was demonstrating how to groom bananas. So I started out with a really ragged banana with old dried leaves, and I took my scissors and I trimmed it, and it looked super nice. Now when I was doing this, I was wearing my husband's old shirt on top of my nice CRFG shirt. And when I finished, I pulled off his old shirt because I wanted to wear my nice CRFG shirt and enjoy the potluck and have fun. Now at the end of the day, I picked up the pot to load it back into the van, and right away I foolishly realized, because I had the gooey part that looked so innocent and clear, the sap was still wet, and it touched my shirt. And there are a couple of little small areas on the back even smaller. And where's the one tote that's a really good example? Okay. See all these rather pronounced dark stains? That was the innocent looking clear banana sap.
Yeah. It'll drip down when you cut overhead, so watch on your clothes.
Careful.
Yeah.
When you do prune your bananas for aesthetics, wear your husband's old shirts or your son's old trousers or something.
Never get rid of the stain.
Yeah, I will not. I really tried too, because I was heartbroken when I realized what I'd done. Right away I realized the sap was wet, and I went and rinsed it as best I could, and it didn't work. Now this I didn't really try with. This was just dedicated to hauling gooey stuff. But it's a great example of, that's a really profound stain. And it's such a clear sap, it looks so innocent when it happens.
Yeah.
Yes?
As far as the stems go, when
The
you're ready,
pseudostem?
yeah, when you're ready to compost them, I had cut one down and I laid it kind of as a border along between things, grass and garden, and it shot up a new plant from this cut stem.
Ah, because you still had some rhizome attached to the base.
I don't.
That's
Well,
unusual.
maybe. I was
Yeah.
in the middle, though. I'm pretty sure it was in the middle. I was perplexed. I don't know.
Because I've never heard of it other than the rhizome.
I'm gonna have to go study it again, but
Okay.
I was very
Bamboo,
surprised.
maybe.
No.
But the leaf, of course, is very easy to crumple and chop up. And the way I like to deal with this, when I cut this out, I have a square nose shovel, and I just lay this on the ground, I just go chop, 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 chop.
You just shred it up as well. Yeah, they cut easily with just an ordinary pruning saw with coarse teeth. You can saw them up into logs and then put them somewhere, and I guess mulch them and keep them damp. They seem to take a long time to decay.
Oh, no, I found them, because they're gooey, I
Yeah.
find that they decay.
They will
very
go
quickly.
away, okay.
Now this is a slice from a pseudostem, and I just thought it'd be fun for people to see it. These are not annual rings like a woody tree, but you can see a circular pattern, because each of these circular circles reflects the edge of one of these leaf petioles. If I were to cross-section this, you would see this. So I just brought this. Now, if you touch this, I warn you, you don't want to wipe your good, because you'll stain, but anyway.
Carol?
Question.
To be sure I understand understand, say you start with something like this, year one, start year one. Year three, I will probably get fruit on it,
see
maybe
that?
3.5, but not 3.
Should be 40.
Then year four, do I have a pump that's far enough along that it will fruit year 4?
You may, in that,
So after you get the first start, if the
Yes.
pups are doing well, you probably will get something every year.
yes, you've got it. You make the initial investment of time growing the rhizome and the maternal pseudostem. But after that, for instance, I had a better select planting in the front yard, and it had been in a 15-gallon pot, and my husband helped me haul it into the front yard because it was a big 15-gallon pot. We popped it in the ground. And it took 18 months for that specimen to come into fruiting, even though it was in a good 15-gallon pot. But 12 months after that first largest pseudostem fruited, I had 3 pseudostems that were either in flower or fruiting, because they had been growing the initial 18 months that first went into the ground, and they were younger than the maternal one and in different stages. So the initial investment in time is, yes, the most costly, the longest. But you shouldn't let too many pups grow. And that, remember, it's one rhizome. And I have a situation in my front yard where I have a whole lot of them grow. And if your aim is to dig them up and put them in pots and distribute them for sale or to gardens, that's great. But if your aim is to make pseudostems that will give you the largest blossoms, that's not great. Which is one reason I have a wimpy blossom here. Because this had way too many younger pseudostems pulling from the same rhizome, the nourishment, and directing it away from making a big blossom with more flowers and fruit.
Like pomegranates.
Well, pomegranates are woody trees,
Yeah.
but I try not to let mine
If you
sucker.
let a bunch of them grow, you're not going to get.
Right. I try and keep my pomegranate to a single trunk, although I didn't do a good job with one in the backyard, I admit, but yeah.
When do they blossom, all year round?
They
or-
don't have a calendar. They just kind of break all of what we consider the standard rules that we're used to in woody trees, because they're not woody. So they can blossom any month of the year. But they're more apt to do it probably in the warm season because they're pumping out more leaves. And remember, they reach this magic 44 or 46 leaves number, and that's starting from when it was first popping out of the ground. And the next thing out is the flower. Now, if you're pushing out 4 leaves in the month of June, you're more apt to trigger and get beyond the 44 or the 46, as opposed to pushing out only 1 leaf for the whole month of December. But I have had them blossom in the winter. I wish they wouldn't, because then I'm always going, ooh, will this be the winter where we actually, you know, we have dipped to freezing occasionally.
Have you tried lights for a little bit of heat?
No. I've known people that you can do that. But I thought, okay, we'll just try and go and see who performs well. For instance, my Orinoco has obviously performed better for me through the years than my Cuban red did. And then when I read the literature about the Viviciana genes imparting more cold hardiness than the straight acuminata, I'm going, oh, yeah, personally I can have experience with that now. So it's just kind of a Carol's field trial in our yard. Other than we tweak it in that if they're potted specimens and the National Weather Service says we're going to dip to freezing, then I Shanghai my husband and we push them all into the garage. But the ones in the yard, they're just out there and they're going to testify as to who's a little hardier to the cold and who's a wimp. I haven't put the lights up to give off heat. No. And I don't have smudge pots. And
Do you mulch around it?
oh, yes. Definitely. Yes.
What pH do they like?
Well, the literature says they like it slightly acidic, but they're not really demanding.
Okay.
So I don't really worry about it. I put a lot of compost in, which tends to help move our alkalines. Most of our soils are alkaline, and that would help move it a little closer to the 7 neutral. But I don't know that we've actually moved into an acidic level below 7. But considering the very attractive leaves, I must be doing something okay with the soil pH. So, it's not like my camellias where I used to go out and buy specialty fertilizer for the camellias because they were really picky. No.
Does the chicken wire work to protect roots against against gophers?
You can use chicken wire as a cage for your root ball against the gophers. However, Vincent Lozano, the master gardener advisor, kind of wonders if some of the smaller gophers might get through that because it's a larger mesh. And I just caught some gophers recently, and some of them were obviously the young, and they were definitely smaller than the one. I got mom or dad as well. So they do vary in size. Whereas the wire mesh is going to, the hardware cloth, which is a wire mesh, is going to cost you more money, but it will also last longer. Because the chicken wire is going to eventually erode and break down faster than the wire mesh.
Carol, buy the half-inch chicken wire, which is called apiary wire.
Oh, they have a finer mesh? That sounds
bird
like a
wire,
better
yeah,
grade.
it's smaller.
Yes. Yeah, I would definitely, if I was going to chicken wire, get the finer mesh size. And if you have gophers, it's worth it at the time you're planting to make the entire wrap. I remember at Quail when we were planting, we went and bought a roll of the hardware mesh, and it wasn't wide enough because we wanted not a deep hole line, but we wanted a wide hole. So we took the wire that had tied the bale together, and we sewed 2 thicknesses together. So instead of being 4 feet wide, we had an 8-foot wide expanse by sewing it together with the wire that baled it. And then we were able to bend the edges up, and we left it about 3 inches higher than the surrounding soil. And by the time we put a nice mulch area around it, aesthetically you didn't see it. And I'm glad, because there have been times when we've seen more gopher problems over there than others. And at the time we were putting the bananas in, there had been some recent gopher problems. Yes?
Did you say that the flower pollinates itself?
Well, it's parthenocarpic, so it doesn't need to be pollinated.
So just leave it alone? And because last winter I got a bloom and I covered it with plastic because of the frost, and I thought, oh, I'm wondering if I'm interfering with the pollen.
No, it's parthenocarpic, so covering the flower with plastic because you're afraid of the freeze isn't going to interfere with the pollination because it doesn't need to be pollinated. Now, if you're at the, let's see, Honduran Federal Agricultural Research Station, or if you're in Catholic University in Brussels, Belgium, and I don't remember the name of the institution in Cameroon, Africa. There are these 3 fantastic centers of the universe for banana research, and they're actually taking pollen and hand pollinating it on varieties that at least are fertile. But on the Cavendish, I guess the pollen isn't fertile anyway. And I'd forgotten the exact statistics. They were talking about the incredible number of bananas they'd have to go through to get a handful of seeds. And then they were planting the seeds in a controlled greenhouse situation with tweaked light and heat, because they were kind of wimpy to get started from seeds anyway. They weren't the strongest seedlings. To put more genes into different configurations, the old-fashioned way, as we say, to develop new varieties. So you may have heard of Goldfinger or Sweetheart, which both came out of the Honduran Research Facility. Now in Brussels, they're splicing and dicing. So they're actually taking segments of genes and inserting them the high science way. Although they don't know where they're going to be able to sell the bananas they eventually grow, because Europe has rejected genetically modified food. But then other people are saying, okay, you would prefer that the world keep growing the bananas the way they are, where they're dousing them with these chemicals, trying to fight Panama disease and black sitatuga. Because Brussels is hoping to develop varieties that would be resistant not only to race 1, but also to race 4 Panama disease and black sitatuga. So we wouldn't have to be dumping these bananas with all these chemicals, these fungicides. So there are pros and cons on the different approaches. But it's not something we're going to do in our backyards. And we don't have to worry about the pollination because it's parthenocarpic for our varieties here. Yes?
You said you've had up to 24 varieties. What's the difference between them? Do they taste different? Are they all the small little ones like that?
They do taste different. Some of them are ladyfinger type, and sometimes they even use ladyfinger in quotes meaning a variety. And it's about the length and the size of a lady's. It's a little bit stockier, but about that long of a ladyfinger, hence the name, which is significantly different in appearance than this one. This one, of course, is very ridged. So there are some differences in the shape, in the size. Now the Cavendish is going to be longer than about any of the varieties we grow. We were trying to grow rhino horn at Quail Gardens, and it fruited, and I guess we have to go back and we adjusted the sign because it wasn't rhino horn. Rhino horn is supposed to have a fruit the size of almost a rhinoceros horn, hence the name, and it was, no. So I'm afraid what we got, and we were told was rhino horn variety, wasn't. So I took and destroyed my plants that were labeled rhino horn because I got it from the same source and they obviously weren't rhino horn. They do have different flavors, somewhat. But also, remember, the banana is probably the fruit that has, I think, the greatest diversity as to what people consider perfection. Now, you ask this man, what is a perfectly ripe banana? And he's going to describe this horrid mess that's all sugar spotted and greasy and slimy and super soft. And he thinks that's perfection. Yes, it is. It's greasy and slimy and horrible. Now, you ask his wife, and I described the same variety, and it has recognizable green, even more so here than you can see, at both ends, and it's still firm, and it has a great flavor. It's not crunchy, it's firm, and it has a nice, sharp flavor. But you see, what is perfection in a banana probably varies more than any other common fruit we eat, as far as from one person to the next. So that may impact the flavor even more than the different varieties, actually. But there are nuances between the different varieties. And it's mouthwatering to read some of the descriptions, even in our own literature. Some of the authors will talk about, well, this variety definitely has essence of apple, and this one tastes more peachy, and this is more pineapple-y.
Sounds like wines.
Yes, I think it's more like incredible complex wine tasting, yes. Yes.
Can we get varieties with colors such as reds and greens in the fruit?
There, of course, the red variety, also called Cuban red, Puerto Rican red, or Jamaican red, has a red mature peel. But that is, I warn you, that's straight acuminata genes, triploid straight acuminata. So I might recommend it for somebody in Del Mar or La Jolla that don't freeze and don't spend as many hours in the low 50s as I do. And I'm only 1 3/4 miles in from the coast. But when I tried to grow Cuban red, it definitely was not as vigorous a plant as some of my other varieties. So I wasn't especially keen on growing it just because it was red, because it wasn't as gung-ho as the other varieties. Okay.
What would you recommend as a dependable banana plant that is not to start out with? I mean, that will give you minimum trouble, not get too high.
Oh, well, I was going to recommend Orinoco, because repeatedly they talk about this probably being the most cold hardy of the backyard bananas we grow in San Diego County. Now, it's a little bit taller, but then Neil just testified, you said 8 feet, right? So, hey, I mean, go with dwarf Orinoco.
I bought one of the exotic on it, grew about 15 feet, and the wind just tore it down.
Oh, yeah, if they get taller and you have an exceptionally wind-prone ridge, there can be a complication there when it's in fruit. Now, before it's in fruit, we just have to remember to see fringe and not pattern, for the most part. But admittedly, once it gets in fruit, that's heavy, and you may need to support it.
Yeah. Even in the commercial establishments, they prop the fruit.
Yeah, I can see pictures sometimes even in magazines of banana growers where they've taken 2 long poles. And we used to have some bamboo growing at Quail Gardens, and sometimes we cut the bamboo stalks and we prop it. Let's say this was arching over here, and we have long poles crossing right underneath the arch of the flowering structure, fruiting structure.
Yeah, you can just cross a couple of 2x4s, long ones, and they'll hold
Or
up.
2x2s, yes. Or you can also bury some galvanized pipe, which is fairly invisible if it's surrounded by a nice planting of banana, in the center of your banana planting. And then once a pseudostem puts on weight because of the fruit, then I like to take a wrap and kind of make a sling and tie it to the galvanized pole. And because the galvanized pole is always there, it's a little easier than getting out the wooden poles and putting it yourself. And we have some galvanized poles at quail where we've done that. I don't think they're too ugly. I don't think they show too much. And it allows us to strap some of the heavy fruiting structures. Yes?
How many times a week do you actually water them?
Well, I should water them, like once a week unless Mother Nature actually does it for me. And I don't always do that. I'm naughty. And the literature will tell you they can look pretty good even if you don't water them as much as ideally, as far as the aesthetics. But it does impact the size of the bloom and you don't get as much fruit if you're not diligent with the water. So if you have a fast draining, sandy type soil and we get out of the rainy season, ideally like probably once a week. But remember, you're not going down 36 inches because their roots are only like 18 inches.
So frequent waterings are the best.
And you want to water a swath as opposed to a depth, because the roots are laterally spreading, not going to the center of the earth. Yes?
What other varieties work in Valley Center where we don't have that much frost or high, and other than the Orinoco?
Well, I would probably stay with the genetically defined plantains. In other words, it has the Cuminata babyciana. So maybe ice cream variety. Ice cream is also called Java Blue or Blue Java. And if you look at this is ancient, but it's very well done. And it has a chart genetically describing, okay, here we go. Commercial dessert type that are triploided Cuminata, and it mentions Gross Michael and a lot of others that I wouldn't recommend for you. And then it'll go into, okay, ABB types. It mentions Orinoco, Dwarf Orinoco, Ice Cream, African Rhino Horn, if you can find it, as opposed to the one we thought we had a quail that didn't turn out to be African Rhino Horn. And the Macho Plantain. So, is this available online, our old publications? Oh, that's too bad. This is back in 1988, and it's just so excellently done, and it talks about the genetic makeup of the different varieties. Because I don't think I've read any other source on bananas that actually gets into the nitty-gritty of talking about this variety is ABB, as opposed to this variety is homozygous triploid acuminata. I mean, the other articles are interesting, but they don't get into the genetics. Yes?
The song Raj, have you dealt with that banana?
I haven't had that one. Is that a Cuminata babyciana cross?
I don't know what the cross is, but I'm understanding that that's from India.
Mm-hmm.
And something from India may see cold weather too, I would think, parts of India. I tried it for a while, had it alive, but I obviously didn't take care of it. But I think I read that was supposedly going to be cold tolerant. It's been a long time, but I haven't dealt with it in a long time, so it's just a remembrance that I would think possibly from India, country, some colder weather and something to consider.
I'm not sure. What does it describe Mysore as? Because Mysore is the top banana in India. And it describes it as being what genetic makeup? Mysore. M-Y... Oh, it's not even going to mention Mysore? Darn, I don't see that one. But the best thing to do is just try the different varieties, keep records, and then report back to us.
I'd like to say something.